Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is DK Bhattacharya speaking and we'll be talking about ethnoarchaeology today. Perhaps you know that archaeology is an empirical science, and on empirical basis you can analyze the antiquity, you can break it down to any level, talk about all the structural details and also of the various kinds of inner techniques used to make these structures. But you still can't say what they're used for. So one of the biggest drawback of of techniques of or methods of doing archaeology is that we have no mechanism of interpreting the functions. And the word interpretation is used only to mean that an interpretation given by a man A will not necessarily agree with the interpretation given by the man B. Interpretation is a logical kind of assumption that you give to the kind of functions of the antiquities. So antiquities per se can be analyzed on a very scientific analytical basis, but the interpretation of them in terms of the functions or range of functions remain basically imaginative, or let us say controlled imaginative, as a projection of interpretation. That far is all right, but for a long time man has been asking what could have been the function of the antiquities that they have discovered, and it became very acute during the time that the cave paintings were discovered. I think in the beginning of the 1900s, two persons who went to Australia, their name is Spencer and Gillen, I think, and they went to Australia to convert the Australian Aborigines to Christianity, and there they found that they go to some isolated regions in the rocks, and there they do some painting on the rituals of their initiation rites or whatever rituals they have. Now this is the first time Spencer and Gillen came out with an interpretative model for the function of rock art. So the rock art was so long analyzed on morphological ground, but for the first time the reason or the purpose of rock art or interpretation of rock art was attempted from an ethnic reality. So an ethnic reality, what is happening in a contemporary ethnic group, was interposed in terms of an analogy to interpret something which happens millions or thousands of years ago. Now this laid down the foundation of what is called ethnoarchaeology. There was heavy objection to this from structuralists. The people who are empiricists, they would say, I can see what I can see and I will analyze only that which I can see and prove. I cannot talk about what may have been the function. And they went to the extent of saying, how dare you compare the practice of Australian Aborigines of 1930 with people of, let us say, 17,000 BCE. 17,000 BCE Upper Paleolithic art, they did not see an aeroplane. They did not know the world around as the Australian Aborigines today see. They have seen aeroplanes, they have seen cars, they have seen jeeps. So their cognitive world is quite different. How can you pick up something in isolation from Australian Aborigines and use it as a model to explain what must have happened in the prehistoric past? So there was a lot of objection from the empiricists. Most of the empiricists did not agree that a kind of lifting of contemporary behavior or contemporary activities of simple societies of today can be used as an interpretation of the past cultural behavior of a given set of antiquities. This situation started changing a little when a man called Louis Robert Binford with his wife called Sally Binford in 1963 started looking at archaeology from a view of an anthropologist. They were the student of Emil Durkheim, and they said archaeology cannot be as irresponsible as constantly analyzing the objects in terms of technomorphology and talking anything about the behavior of the past. So they created a subject called new archaeology. At that time it was called new, but 1963 cannot continue to be new. So many people has renamed it as processual archaeology. So processual archaeology says that don't try to find out, when you find a group of antiquities, don't try to compare it in terms of the available knowledge, but try to reconstruct the activity of the region, what they may have done there, what was their group structure, what were their gender roles, and blah blahs and blah blahs. So if you study the antiquities, in the manner you study a tribal group, or in the study a kind of a social band. So you study the tools in order to understand the activity reconstruction. I repeat, Binford says we'll reconstruct the activity rather than rush to try and give it a name, lower Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic culture, and so on. Don't do that. We have done enough of it. Let us reconstruct the activity of a given band in the antiquities that we have found. In order to drive the point further, he tried to study the nomadic Eskimos, and he did it in a very interesting way. He stayed with the Eskimos for a long time. And when they used to change their summer camp to the winter camp, and from the winter camp to the summer camp, the abandoned camp, he used to study, he used to leave himself behind and used to study the material left by the people of the debris of the summer camp and study them archaeologically in order to interpret what could have been the activity areas, functional areas, because he has lived with them there, so he knows them. So he said, from the antiquities, I can interpret the function and the activities reconstruction. So this shift came to activity reconstruction of the past. And then the ethnoarchaeology, the broad group, started getting back some of its honor. It was so much dishonored by the empiricists earlier, and it is after Binford came up that large number of people started seeing sense in it. They started saying ethnoarchaeology has a meaning, because otherwise you cannot interpret the material. It is as ridiculous as saying it is a hand X, because it is a hand X, therefore it is a hand X QED. You cannot say anything beyond the hand X. And that's too stupid. You need to go beyond, and in order to go beyond, you need to have some methodology. We didn't have any methodology. You need to have some methodology to link it with activity area, link it with activity imperatives. And he tried to propose many methods, like catchment area analysis, site formation analysis, hundreds of methodologies and hundreds of various factors he tried to create in order to analyze the meaning of why of the tools rather than what of the tools. And ethnoarchaeology started taking back or getting back some of the honor that it has lost in the empiricist period. And then people started, because there are very few ethnic groups left who are isolated groups. But then you start looking at ethnic groups again. This happened from around 1965. 1965, his book came in the New Archaeology. So 1965 onwards, some group of people started looking for the activity reconstruction from the antiquity structure. Now they started studying tribes. Many tribes being studied. For instance, in India, you have Birhors, who are hunter-gatherers even today. Now, what kind of hunting gathering? They have become beggars outside a Hindu temple during Tuesday and outside a Muslim mosque during Fridays. Now, that's the easy way of getting some cash, and yet they are hunter-gatherers. They will not do any farming. They were given land, they were given seed, they were given plows, and they cut the plow as firewood, and the seed they boiled and ate, and the land is lying fallow. So the cognition of doing farming with a labor-intensive social organization is not there in the community. Here are the groups. Birhor is one of them. Chenchus are there in Andhra. So you have large amount of hunter-gatherers even today. Some people thought that let us look at these groups and try to understand what makes them choose out of alternatives. So if you have two alternatives, what alternative will you choose to survive when there is a stress in the community? So you start trying to address the issues that traditional archaeology cannot. Traditional archaeology did not or will never address the issues of choice making. And there Julian Stewart was used, which is cumulative history. Cumulative history means you make a